Why does the universe look so empty? When we say the universe is empty, we are not speaking poetically or emotionally. We are describing a measurable physical condition. Most of the universe is not filled with stars, galaxies, or glowing matter. It is filled with space itself, vast regions where almost nothing resides, where particles are so sparse that even the word thin feels too generous. This emptiness is not a failure of observation. It is what careful measurement reveals. If you look at the night sky, it feels crowded with points of light. But that impression collapses the moment a scale is introduced. Those points are concentrated into tiny islands, separated by distances so large that even light takes years, thousands of years, millions of years to cross the gaps. Between stars, between galaxies, and especially between clusters of galaxies, there is an overwhelming dominance of near-nothingness. The universe is not mostly full with a few empty gaps. It is mostly empty with a few rare concentrations of matter. This channel exists to explore these kinds of ideas slowly and clearly. And if this way of approaching physics feels right to you, you are warmly invited to like and subscribe. Our goal is to reach 1,000 subscribers by the end of January. And when we do, we will donate $100 to UNICEF, helping extend access to learning to those who cannot easily reach knowledge through the internet. And as you listen, you might take a moment to leave a comment sharing where in the world you are listening from, knowing that this same vast space stretches above all of us. When physicists describe emptiness, they do not mean absolute nothing. Even the emptiest regions contain energy, fields, and the faint background glow left over from the early universe. But compared to the dense cores of stars or galaxies, these regions are profoundly vacant. Matter is so diluted that if you could drift through intergalactic space, you would travel for years without encountering a single atom. Emptiness, here, is a statement about proportion. What makes this unsettling is not just how empty the universe is, but how naturally that emptiness arises. It is not the result of decay or loss. It is the default outcome of how the universe behaves. Matter does not spread evenly and stay that way. It gathers briefly, collapses into structures, and then leaves behind enormous volumes that are almost completely bare. This means emptiness is not something that happened after the universe formed. It is something that emerged alongside structure itself. Every star that ignites, every galaxy that assembles, does so by pulling matter inward and leaving more space behind. Structure and emptiness grow together, inseparable from one another. When this is understood, emptiness stops being a backdrop and becomes a central feature. The universe is not a full container with a few holes punched into it. It is a vast, expanding volume in which matter briefly resists dispersion before ultimately yielding to it. Emptiness is not an absence waiting to be filled. It is the dominant condition toward which the universe naturally moves. This is where the discomfort begins, because once emptiness is framed this way, it no longer feels accidental. It feels inevitable. Once emptiness is understood as the dominant condition, the next step is to measure it. Not intuitively, but physically. When cosmologists calculate how much of the universe is actually made of matter, the result is quietly staggering. Nearly all of the universe's volume contains almost no matter at all. Stars, planets, gas, and dust occupy an unimaginably small fraction of what exists. Even within galaxies, which feel dense by cosmic standards, space overwhelmingly dominates. The distances between stars are so vast that entire solar systems could pass between them without interaction. Galaxies themselves, containing hundreds of billions of stars, are separated by expanses that dwarf their own size. And beyond clusters of galaxies lie voids so large that they can contain millions of galaxies worth of volume with almost nothing inside. This imbalance is not subtle. If the universe were scaled down to the size of Earth, all of its matter would occupy something closer to the size of a city, while the rest would be empty atmosphere and vacuum extending in every direction. Matter is not evenly spread. It is rare, isolated, and vastly outnumbered by space. What makes this unsettling is that matter is the only part of the universe we directly experience. Everything familiar, from light to warmth to solidity, arises from this tiny fraction. The overwhelming majority of existence is something we never touch, never see directly, and never inhabit. The universe we live in is built entirely from its exception, not its rule. Even more quietly disturbing is that this ratio is not stable. As the universe expands, the amount of space increases, but the amount of matter does not. Matter becomes more diluted over time, spread thinner across a growing volume. Emptiness does not merely dominate. It strengthens its dominance as the universe ages. This means that emptiness is not just large, it is growing. Every second, the balance tips further away from matter and toward space itself. Galaxies drift farther apart. Intergalactic regions widen. What little matter exists becomes increasingly isolated within an expanding sea of near nothingness. At this stage, emptiness stops feeling like a background condition and starts to feel like an active one. It is not waiting passively around islands of matter. It is expanding, asserting itself, and claiming more of the universe's volume with time. Matter persists, but it does so under increasing pressure from the growth of space. This realization reframes what the universe fundamentally is. It is not primarily a place where things exist. It is a place where things briefly resist being spread apart. Matter is the anomaly. Space is the rule. And once that proportion is seen clearly, the question changes. The mystery is no longer why there is so much emptiness. The mystery becomes why there is any lasting structure at all. Once the imbalance between matter and space is clear, the next realization follows naturally. Even the parts of the universe we think of as crowded are almost entirely empty. Stars feel substantial because of their brightness and mass, but they are separated by distances so large that the emptiness between them overwhelms the stars themselves. Inside a galaxy, stars are not packed together like grains of sand. They are more like isolated points suspended in a vast volume. The nearest star to our sun is so far away that light takes years to cross the gap. If stars were reduced to the size of grains of dust, the distances between them would still stretch for kilometers. The galaxy would remain mostly void. Galaxies give the illusion of fullness because we see them flattened into images, their light compressed into glowing shapes. But in 3 dimensions, they are ghostly structures. Their disks and halos contain enormous regions where nothing at all passes through. Even within spiral arms rich with gas and dust, emptiness dominates. Matter appears only in brief concentrations before giving way again to space. When galaxies cluster together, the illusion intensifies. Groups and clusters appear massive and complex, but they occupy only tiny portions of the space they inhabit. Between galaxies in a cluster are regions so empty that even stray atoms are rare. and between clusters lie voids that stretch for hundreds of millions of light years, containing almost no galaxies at all. What makes this unsettling is that structure does not scale with size. As systems grow larger, they do not become fuller, they become emptier. A galaxy cluster is vastly larger than a single galaxy, yet proportionally more empty. The universe builds structure by spreading matter thinner, across greater distances, not by filling space. This means that the most dramatic structures in the cosmos exist as fragile threads stretched across a largely vacant volume. The cosmic web, with its filaments and nodes, is not a dense network. It is a sparse framework outlining enormous regions of emptiness. Matter traces the edges. Space fills everything else. The terror here is subtle. It lies in the realization that structure is not the norm. It is a temporary pattern that emerges against overwhelming emptiness. Stars and galaxies do not define the universe's character. They interrupt it. And once this is seen, the next question becomes unavoidable. If emptiness so thoroughly dominates even within structure, what force allows matter to gather at all instead of dissolving entirely into space? The only reason the universe is not completely empty is gravity. Without it, matter would never gather at all. Every atom would drift apart as space expands, thinning endlessly until structure became impossible. Gravity is the single force that resists emptiness, pulling matter inward while the universe pushes everything outward. Gravity works slowly, but it works relentlessly. Where matter is even slightly denser than its surroundings, gravity begins to act. Atoms drift closer. Gas thickens. Over time, these tiny imbalances grow. Regions that are only marginally heavier start to pull in more material, while surrounding regions are left even emptier than before. Structure forms not by filling space, but by abandoning it. This process immediately creates contrast. Every gravitational collapse produces two outcomes at once. A dense object forms, and an even larger region is stripped of matter. A star ignites, but the space around it becomes emptier. A galaxy assembles, but the surrounding volume is depleted. Gravity does not fight emptiness everywhere. It concentrates resistance into isolated pockets. This is why matter appears in islands. Gravity has a limited reach. It cannot pull matter in from infinite distance. It gathers what is nearby, what is already close enough to feel its influence. Beyond that range, expansion wins. Space stretches faster than gravity can respond, and matter drifts away, lost to growing emptiness. As structures grow larger, this effect intensifies. A galaxy pulls matter from its local environment, leaving behind a halo of thinner and thinner material. A cluster of galaxies draws matter inward from an even larger region, carving out vast surrounding voids. The stronger the structure, the emptier the space it leaves behind. This means gravity does not prevent emptiness. It shapes it. It organizes emptiness into vast regions between concentrated knots of matter. The universe does not balance fullness and void. It exaggerates their difference. Where gravity succeeds, it succeeds completely. Where it fails, emptiness dominates entirely. What makes this unsettling is that gravity's victories are temporary. It can gather matter, but it cannot stop the expansion of space itself. Structures form, but they do so while standing on ground that is steadily being pulled apart beneath them. Gravity builds islands, but it cannot fill the ocean. Even stars, the densest objects short of collapse, are fragile in this context. They shine briefly on cosmic timescales, then fade. Galaxies evolve, collide, and settle, but their surroundings continue to thin. Gravity's work is local and limited, while expansion acts everywhere all the time. This reveals a deeper truth. The universe allows structure only where gravity briefly outruns expansion. Everywhere else, emptiness claims the space. Structure is not the universe's natural state. It is a temporary defiance against a background that favors dispersion. And once gravity's role is understood this way, another tension becomes visible. From the very beginning, gravity has been competing with expansion. One pulls inward, the other pushes outward, and the emptiness of the universe is the result of which one is winning, more and more as time goes on. From the very first moments of the universe, gravity was never acting alone. Even as matter began to clump, space itself was already expanding, carrying everything outward at once. This expansion was not an afterthought or a later development. It was built into the universe from its earliest state, shaping everything that would follow. In the beginning, expansion was so rapid that matter had little chance to settle. Space stretched faster than atoms could respond, thinning the universe almost as quickly as it formed. Only where matter was slightly denser did gravity manage to slow this outward motion, allowing regions to hold together long enough for structure to begin. This sets up a competition that never ends. Gravity works locally, pulling matter inward where it can. Expansion works globally, increasing the distance between everything everywhere. Gravity must fight to maintain every structure it creates, while expansion never has to rest. It acts uniformly, continuously, without preference. Early on, gravity had an advantage in small regions. The universe was denser, and matter was closer together. Under those conditions, gravity could briefly win, gathering gas into the first stars and galaxies. But even then, expansion never stopped. It simply slowed locally while continuing to stretch the larger fabric of space. As time passed and the universe expanded, the balance shifted. Matter became more diluted. The distances gravity needed to overcome grew larger. Regions that once could collapse no longer could. Expansion did not need to become stronger to win. Gravity simply became weaker by comparison as matter spread thinner. This means emptiness is not something that emerges late. It is present from the start, growing steadily as expansion outpaces gravity in more and more regions. Every structure that forms does so against an expanding background that is already working to pull it apart. The unsettling part is that this competition is not fair. Gravity must gather matter piece by piece over immense timescales against resistance that acts instantly and everywhere. Expansion does not need to target structures to weaken them. It only needs to continue. Over time, this guarantees a particular outcome. Gravity will succeed only in places where matter is already concentrated enough to resist being stretched apart. Everywhere else, expansion will dominate completely, thinning matter until nothing meaningful remains. This explains why the universe does not settle into a balanced state. There is no equilibrium where gravity and expansion cancel out. There are only brief regions of resistance surrounded by an ever-growing volume where expansion wins uncontested. Seen this way, emptiness is not an accident or a later development. It is the visible record of a contest that gravity has been slowly losing since the beginning. Structure exists where gravity has managed to delay the inevitable. Emptiness exists where it has not. And once this competition is understood, the universe no longer appears empty by chance. It appears empty by design of its fundamental behavior, shaped by expansion that never stops, and gravity that can only hold on for so long. There was a time when the universe was not empty in the way it is now. In its earliest moments, space was smaller, hotter, and packed with energy and matter. Distances were short. Particles were crowded together. Emptiness, as we experience it today, had not yet taken hold. This early fullness was not stable. It existed because the universe had not yet had time to stretch itself thin. Expansion was already underway, but everything was so compressed that matter still filled most of the available volume. Space had not yet outpaced substance. As the universe cooled, matter began to separate from radiation. Atoms formed. Gas emerged. For a brief window, gravity had abundant material to work with, and the distances it needed to overcome were small. Structure could begin forming almost everywhere. The universe was still dense enough that emptiness had not yet claimed most of its volume. This period can feel comforting when viewed from a distance. It suggests a universe that began full and then somehow lost its content. But that impression is misleading. The early fullness was not a stable condition that faded. It was a temporary phase that existed only because expansion had not yet done its work. Even during this time, emptiness was being prepared. As expansion continued, matter thinned. Regions that failed to collapse early were stretched apart. Gravity could only act where matter gathered quickly enough. Everywhere else, expansion quietly won. This means the early universe was not resisting emptiness. It was delaying it. Fullness was not the natural state being preserved. It was the initial condition being dismantled. The first stars and galaxies formed during this narrowing window. They ignited while matter was still dense enough to collapse efficiently. Their formation marks the moment when gravity scored its earliest victories. But each victory came at a cost. Every collapse pulled matter out of surrounding space, accelerating the growth of emptier regions. As time passed, this process became irreversible. Once matter was sufficiently diluted, new large-scale collapse became rare. The universe crossed a threshold where gravity could no longer compete everywhere. From that point on, emptiness began to dominate permanently. What makes this unsettling is that the universe's brief fullness was never meant to last. It was not a balance to be maintained. It was a starting condition that expansion was always going to erase. Seen this way, the early universe is not a comforting origin story. It is a warning. It shows what the universe looks like before emptiness asserts itself fully. And it reveals that emptiness is not the result of decay or loss, but the expected outcome once expansion has enough time to act. From this point forward, the universe does not move toward fullness again. It moves steadily in the opposite direction, thinning matter further, widening gaps, and turning early density into vast, enduring voids. As the universe moves beyond that early window, the consequences of expansion become impossible to ignore. Matter does not disappear, but it becomes increasingly diluted. The same amount of material is spread across a growing volume, and that simple fact quietly reshapes everything that follows. Emptiness is no longer something forming at the edges. It becomes the dominant condition everywhere. In practical terms, this thinning happens constantly. Every second, space itself stretches. Galaxies drift farther apart. The distances between clusters grow. Regions that once contained a modest amount of gas are stretched until that gas becomes so sparse that gravity can no longer gather it into anything new. Expansion does not need to remove matter to make space emptier. It only needs to keep increasing the distance between what already exists. This process is relentless because it acts uniformly. Expansion does not slow down in regions where matter is scarce. It does not pause to allow gravity to catch up. It simply continues, increasing the scale of the universe while leaving matter behind in ever more isolated pockets. Over time, the contrast between where matter is and where it is not becomes extreme. What makes this particularly unsettling is that thinning is irreversible on large scales. Once matter is stretched beyond the reach of gravity, it does not return. Gas that might have formed stars if it had remained slightly denser is lost to expansion. Entire regions of space cross a threshold where structure becomes impossible, not because of destruction, but because of separation. This means the universe has a memory. Its current emptiness reflects past opportunities that are now gone. There were eras when matter was close enough to collapse, when new galaxies could form easily, when structure could grow in many places at once. As expansion proceeds, those eras end one by one, region by region. The thinning of matter also changes how time feels on cosmic scales. Early on, change happened quickly. Structures formed rapidly because material was abundant and nearby. As matter spreads out, processes slow down. Star formation becomes rarer. Galaxy growth becomes less dramatic. The universe ages into quietness not because it runs out of energy, but because everything is too far apart to interact efficiently. This gradual quieting is one of the most unsettling aspects of cosmic emptiness. The universe is not racing toward chaos. It is stretching toward silence. Activity fades not with violence, but with distance. Systems do not collapse catastrophically. They simply lose the ability to influence one another. As expansion thins matter, gravity's influence becomes increasingly local. A galaxy may remain bound internally, its stars orbiting calmly, but its connection to the wider universe weakens. Neighboring galaxies drift away. Clusters loosen. Eventually, even the large-scale structure that once connected everything becomes fragmented. This fragmentation is not sudden. It unfolds over billions of years, slowly enough that no single moment marks the transition. But the direction is clear. The universe is moving from a state where interactions were common to a state where isolation is the norm. Emptiness grows not by erasing matter, but by isolating it. What deepens the unease is that this thinning favors space itself. As volume increases, space gains dominance not because it changes, but because matter does not multiply to keep pace. Space does not need substance to justify its expansion. It expands simply because the universe allows it to. This leads to a quiet asymmetry. Matter must struggle to remain relevant. It must collapse, ignite, and organize itself to resist being spread thin. Space, by contrast, only needs to continue being space. Emptiness does not require effort. It emerges naturally as expansion proceeds. Over time, this asymmetry reshapes the universe's character. Regions that once teemed with activity become quieter. Star formation slows as gas thins. Galaxies exhaust their fuel and stop producing new light. The universe does not become empty all at once. It becomes progressively less active, more sparse, more still. This thinning also affects how the universe can be known. As matter spreads out, fewer signals are generated. Fewer stars shine. fewer events produce light. The universe does not just become emptier in substance, it becomes emptier in information. There is less to observe, less to measure, less to witness. This is where emptiness begins to feel truly unsettling. It is not just the absence of matter, it is the gradual absence of interaction, of change, of newness. The universe becomes a place where most things that will ever happen have already happened, and what remains is slow fading rather than renewal. Yet this outcome is not the result of decay or failure. It is the straightforward consequence of expansion acting over time. Given enough time, any finite amount of matter will become sparse in an ever-growing volume. The universe does not choose emptiness. It drifts into it because nothing stops it. Seen this way, emptiness is not a mystery to be solved later. It is the direction the universe has been moving toward since its earliest moments. The early universe delayed it through density. Gravity delayed it through collapse. But expansion has always been patient. As the universe continues to age, this thinning accelerates its effects. Regions that are currently active will quiet. Structures that are currently connected will separate. Emptiness will not suddenly appear. It will simply become more complete. And once this thinning is fully understood, the next realization follows naturally. Matter does not disappear uniformly. It traces patterns as it retreats, leaving behind an intricate structure of filaments and voids. To understand emptiness fully, it becomes necessary to look at how matter organizes itself on the largest scales before being spread apart. Matter does not retreat into emptiness randomly. As expansion thins the universe, gravity leaves behind a recognizable pattern, one that stretches across the largest scales we can observe. Before emptiness becomes dominant everywhere, matter organizes itself into an immense structure known as the cosmic web, a network that quietly reveals how emptiness grows. On these scales, the universe looks nothing like a smooth distribution of galaxies. Matter traces long, faint filaments that stretch across hundreds of millions of light years. Where filaments intersect, clusters of galaxies form dense knots. Between them lie vast voids, enormous regions where almost nothing resides. The universe begins to resemble a skeleton rather than a filled body. These voids are not small gaps. Some are so large that light takes billions of years to cross them. Inside them, galaxies are rare or absent entirely. Gas is stretched thin. Gravity has little material to work with. Expansion dominates almost completely. These regions are not temporary. Once a void forms, it grows. The cosmic web is created by gravity acting early, when matter was still close enough to collapse. Slight variations in density were amplified, pulling matter into filaments and nodes. But as matter flowed into these structures, it was drained from surrounding regions. The more defined the filaments became, the emptier the voids grew. This is the unsettling symmetry of structure. Every place where matter gathers leaves behind a much larger place where it does not. The web does not fill space. It outlines emptiness. Matter traces the boundaries of voids rather than occupying their centers. As expansion continues, this pattern becomes more extreme. Filaments stretch, voids widen. Matter does not refill the empty regions because expansion carries it away faster than gravity can pull it back. Once a void begins to dominate a region, it accelerates its own emptiness. There is less gravity to resist expansion, so space stretches more easily there. This creates a feedback loop. Dense regions grow denser relative to their surroundings, while empty regions grow emptier. The universe amplifies contrast rather than smoothing it out. Structure sharpens at the edges, and emptiness claims the interior. What makes this terrifying is not just the size of the voids, but their permanence. Voids are not gaps waiting to be filled. They are outcomes. Once expansion takes control of a region, gravity loses the ability to reverse it. Matter that might have collapsed into stars is carried too far away, diluted beyond recovery. Over time, the cosmic web becomes less about connection and more about separation. Filaments thin. Clusters become more isolated. The distances between structures increase until even the web itself begins to fragment. What was once a connected network turns into disconnected islands surrounded by immense nothingness. This means the large-scale structure of the universe is not a sign of fullness. It is a record of retreat. The web shows where matter managed to resist emptiness longest, not where it filled space successfully. The emptiness between filaments is not secondary. It is the dominant feature. As the universe ages, the voids grow faster than the structures. Filaments do not thicken to compensate. They stretch and weaken. Expansion favors the empty regions because there is less mass to slow it down. The emptier a region becomes, the more easily it expands, and the more empty it becomes still. Eventually, this process reaches a point where even the largest structures stop interacting meaningfully with one another. Clusters drift apart. Filaments lose their grip. The web unravels slowly, not violently, but inexorably. Seen this way, the cosmic web is not a triumph of structure. It is a temporary framework outlining where matter once had influence. It is the last trace of resistance before emptiness takes over almost completely. The terror is not sudden destruction. It is the quiet realization that the universe's largest patterns are already shaped by absence. What we call structure exists mainly to show us how empty everything else has become. And as the web continues to stretch and thin, another question emerges. If even this vast structure cannot halt emptiness, what happens when expansion itself begins to accelerate, pushing space apart faster than gravity can ever hope to respond? And it is precisely at this point that the story takes its most unsettling turn. For most of the 20th century, astronomers assumed that expansion would gradually slow. Gravity, acting across enormous distances, was expected to pull the universe inward, gently, breaking its outward motion. Emptiness would grow, yes, but reluctantly, held in check by the collective weight of matter. That assumption was wrong. When astronomers began measuring distant supernovae with enough precision to track how expansion had changed over time, they found something deeply unexpected. The universe was not slowing down, it was speeding up. Space itself was stretching faster now than it had in the past. This discovery did not announce itself loudly. It emerged quietly from data that refused to align with expectation. Distant galaxies were farther away than they should have been. Their light was more stretched than predicted. The universe, it seemed, had changed its behavior. The implication was immediate and disturbing. Expansion was no longer merely winning against gravity. It was accelerating away from it. To explain this, physicists were forced to confront something new, something that did not clump, did not collapse, and did not thin as the universe expanded. A form of energy inherent to space itself, now known as dark energy, appeared to be driving expansion faster as more space came into existence. This changes the meaning of emptiness entirely. Before this discovery, emptiness grew because matter spread out. Now, emptiness grows because space itself becomes more powerful as it grows. The universe is not just drifting apart. It is being pushed apart by its own fabric. Dark energy does not pull. It does not gather. It does not form structure. It does the opposite. It increases the rate at which space expands, making it harder and harder for gravity to hold anything together across large distances. This introduces a terrifying asymmetry. Gravity weakens as matter spreads out. Dark energy does not weaken. Its influence remains constant per unit of space. As the universe grows, dark energy gains more territory to act within. The emptier the universe becomes, the more effective dark energy becomes at making it emptier still. This is not a balance that can be restored. Once dark energy dominates, there is no mechanism that can reverse its influence. Gravity can still bind local systems, galaxies, clusters, even stars. But beyond those islands, expansion accelerates unchecked. This means the future of the universe is not just empty. It is isolating. Galaxies that are not gravitationally bound to one another will eventually recede faster than light can travel between them. Their light will never reach each other again. They will slip beyond cosmic horizons, not because they disappear, but because space grows too quickly for signals to cross it. Over time, this will erase the visible universe itself. Distant galaxies will fade from view, stretched into darkness. The cosmic web will dissolve not by breaking apart, but by being pulled beyond communication. Each region of space will become an island unto itself, surrounded by an ocean of expansion it cannot cross. What makes this terrifying is not destruction. Nothing explodes. Nothing collapses catastrophically. The universe simply becomes unreachable to itself. Even the emptiness changes character. It is no longer just vacant. It is actively expanding, actively isolating, actively preventing interaction. The universe does not merely allow emptiness, it enforces it. In such a universe, structure does not fail dramatically. It becomes irrelevant at large scales. Galaxies continue orbiting internally, while the rest of the cosmos slips away, unseen and unreachable. This marks a fundamental shift. Earlier emptiness emerged because matter thinned. Now emptiness grows because space itself insists on it. The universe is not heading toward a static, cold void. It is heading toward a dynamic one, where separation increases faster and faster, and where what exists becomes increasingly alone. This realization reframes everything that came before. The cosmic web was already thinning. Voids were already growing. But now there is no long-term hope of reconnection. No future era where gravity regains control on large scales. Emptiness is no longer just dominant. It is victorious. And once this acceleration is understood, the question changes again. The issue is no longer how empty the universe is now, but what happens to matter, light, and structure when expansion never stops accelerating, and emptiness becomes the defining feature of everything that remains. Once expansion begins accelerating, the fate of structure becomes quietly sealed. Gravity can still hold galaxies together internally, but it can no longer keep the universe connected. The future is not one of collapse, but of separation so complete that even the memory of connection fades. At first, this separation is subtle. Nearby galaxies remain visible. Clusters continue to orbit as they always have. Nothing dramatic announces the change, but beyond these local neighborhoods, distance grows faster than light can travel. Galaxies that are not gravitationally bound begin to recede permanently, slipping beyond a horizon that no signal can cross. This horizon is not a wall in space. It is a limit created by expansion itself. Beyond it, light emitted now will never reach us, no matter how long we wait. Those galaxies still exist, still shine, still evolve, but they are erased from our observable universe forever. Not destroyed, simply removed from contact. As time passes, this process accelerates. More galaxies cross this horizon. The cosmic web thins until only the nearest filaments remain visible. Clusters that once defined the large-scale structure of the universe become isolated systems drifting alone in an ever-expanding void. Eventually, even the memory of a crowded universe disappears. Future observers, if they exist, will see far fewer galaxies than we do today. The sky will grow emptier with time, not because galaxies vanish, but because space grows too fast for their light to arrive. This is one of the most unsettling implications of cosmic emptiness. The universe does not preserve its own history. Expansion actively erases evidence of what once existed. The farther into the future one looks, the less there will be to see. At extreme timescales, this isolation becomes complete. Each remaining bound system becomes its own observable universe. Everything beyond it is unreachable, causally disconnected, lost behind accelerating space. The cosmos fractures into countless lonely regions that will never interact again. In such a future, the universe appears small not because it is small, but because emptiness has hidden almost all of it. The observable universe shrinks even as the total universe grows. Knowledge becomes local. Context disappears. This is not a universe ending in fire or collapse. It ends in silence and distance. Expansion does not tear galaxies apart violently. It simply carries them away from one another until interaction becomes impossible. Stars will still burn. Planets will still orbit. But the larger story of the cosmos will be inaccessible. No signals from beyond the local group will arrive. No evidence of a once connected universe will remain written in the sky. The terror here is not destruction. It is isolation on a cosmic scale. A universe where structure survives only locally, surrounded by emptiness that grows faster than any attempt to cross it. And, as this isolation deepens, another consequence emerges. When galaxies become isolated, the processes that create new light begin to slow. Star formation depends on interaction, on gas flows, on collisions and mergers. In an empty, accelerating universe, those interactions become rare. This leads naturally to the next stage of emptiness. A universe not only spread apart, but gradually growing darker, quieter, and more still with time. As galaxies drift into isolation, the universe enters a quieter phase, one defined not by sudden change, but by gradual fading. Darkness does not arrive all at once. It spreads slowly, the way distance spreads, by making interaction rarer rather than by removing what already exists. Stars are born from dense clouds of gas, pulled together by gravity and often triggered by interaction. Galaxies collide, pass through one another, compress gas, and ignite bursts of star formation. Even gentle gravitational encounters can stir material enough to create new light. In a connected universe, these processes are common. In an empty one, they become exceptional. As expansion accelerates and galaxies separate, those encounters dwindle. Gas that might have flowed between systems remains trapped locally. Clouds that might have collapsed are stretched thin. Over time, galaxies exhaust the gas they already contain. star formation slows, then becomes sporadic, then eventually stops altogether. This is not because stars are forbidden from forming. It is because the conditions that allow them to form become rare. Emptiness starves the universe of interaction. Without fresh material or external disturbances, galaxies settle into stillness. Their remaining stars age, burn their fuel, and fade. The universe does not go dark because stars suddenly vanish. It goes dark because new stars stop appearing. Light becomes something inherited from the past rather than generated in the present. Each generation of stars is dimmer than the last, until the sky contains mostly remnants rather than beacons. Over immense timescales, even the longest-lived stars exhaust their fuel. White dwarfs cool. Neutron stars fade. Black holes persist, but they do not shine unless fed, and in an empty universe, there is little left to feed them. The cosmos becomes populated by cold objects drifting in near silence. What makes this darkness unsettling is that it is not absolute. The universe does not become empty of matter or energy. It becomes empty of events. Nothing dramatic marks the transition. The lights simply stop turning on. Darkness here is not the absence of existence. It is the absence of renewal. The universe retains what it has made, but it loses the ability to make more. Time stretches forward with less and less happening, not because time runs out, but because opportunities do. As space continues to expand, even background radiation thins and cools. The faint afterglow of the early universe stretches into wavelengths so long they become almost undetectable. The universe forgets its own heat, its own brightness, its own beginnings. In this future, emptiness deepens its hold. Space is not just empty of matter, it is empty of light, of motion, of change. The universe becomes a place where the most common state is inactivity. This is the quiet endpoint implied by emptiness. Not destruction, not collapse, but stillness. A universe where what exists persists, but almost nothing happens. And as darkness spreads, another realization emerges. Emptiness does not simply surround matter, it outlasts it. The universe is not moving toward a dramatic end, but toward a state where emptiness becomes the most enduring feature of all. As darkness spreads and activity slows, matter does not vanish, but its role changes profoundly. The universe does not erase what it has made. It preserves it in forms that become increasingly inert, increasingly disconnected from any larger process. Matter survives, but meaning, in the sense of interaction and transformation, thins away. In an empty, accelerating universe, matter becomes trapped locally. Stars that remain bound to one another continue their quiet orbits. Planets circle cooling remnants. But without new gas, without external disturbances, these systems become closed loops. What they contain is all they will ever contain. Nothing new arrives, nothing significant leaves. Over unimaginably long timescales, even the most stable objects change. White dwarfs cool toward darkness. Neutron stars lose residual heat. Black holes persist to the longest, massive and silent. But even they are not eternal in an empty cosmos. Given enough time, they slowly lose mass through subtle quantum processes, fading not with violence, but with patience. What remains is matter stripped of opportunity. It exists, but it does not participate. It no longer shapes large-scale structures because large-scale structures no longer exists. Expansion has separated every bound region from every other. Each island of matter becomes its own universe, complete but isolated, drifting in a sea of expansion that no longer carries information between them. This isolation changes the meaning of survival. To persist is no longer to influence, it is simply to endure. Matter becomes archival, a record of past activity rather than a driver of future change. The universe carries its history forward not through ongoing processes, but through frozen outcomes. As time stretches further, even these remnants lose distinction. Temperature differences smooth out. Energy gradients fade. Without gradients, nothing flows. Without flow, nothing happens. The universe approaches a state where matter is present but inactive, evenly distributed within each isolated region, incapable of producing new structure. This is not destruction in the usual sense. No catastrophe marks the transition. It is a gradual leveling, a quiet erosion of difference. Emptiness does not need to remove matter. It only needs to outlast motion. What makes this deeply unsettling is that it is not dramatic. There is no final moment when the universe becomes empty. There is only a slow approach toward a condition where emptiness dominates every meaningful scale. Matter becomes a detail rather than a feature. In this future, even time feels different. Change becomes so rare that intervals between events stretch beyond comprehension. The universe does not stop existing. It stops evolving in any noticeable way. It becomes static not because it is frozen, but because there is nothing left to rearrange. This fate is not imposed from outside. It emerges naturally, from the same rules that allowed stars and galaxies to form in the first place. Expansion continues. Energy spreads. Entropy increases. Emptiness is not an invader. It is the destination those rules imply. Seen this way, the universe is not empty because it failed. It is empty because it succeeded at expanding, cooling, and following its laws without interruption. Matter did everything it could. It formed a structure. It burned brightly. It shaped complexity. And then, having done so, it was slowly outpaced by space itself. This reframes terror again. The fear is not of annihilation, but of irrelevance. Matter persists, but it no longer matters in the way it once did. It cannot shape the future. It can only carry the past. And once this long fate is understood, another realization emerges. Quieter but more profound. Emptiness is not a mistake in the universe's design. It is the most stable outcome of its behavior. The universe was never arranged to stay full forever. From this perspective, emptiness is not a void waiting to be filled. It is the final configuration toward which everything naturally moves. Structure is temporary. Activity is brief. Emptiness is what remains when time has had enough space to act. And that leads to the most unsettling implication of all. The universe is not becoming empty against its will. It is becoming empty because nothing in its laws prevents it from doing so. Once the long fate of matter is understood, the idea of emptiness shifts again. It stops feeling like an error in the universe's design and begins to look like the most stable outcome permitted by its laws. Emptiness is not what happens when something goes wrong. It is what happens when nothing intervenes. From the beginning, the universe followed simple rules. Space expands, energy spreads, systems move toward equilibrium. None of these rules favor fullness. None of them preserve structure indefinitely. They allow complexity to arise, but they do not protect it from time. This is what makes emptiness so unsettling. It does not arrive through catastrophe. There is no collapse that can be blamed. No singular event marks the transition. The universe simply does what its equations describe, step by step, until the result becomes unavoidable. In this sense, structure is not the universe's default state. It is a temporary arrangement made possible by special conditions early on. High density, close proximity, abundant energy gradients. These conditions allowed gravity to briefly compete with expansion and entropy. But once those conditions fade, the universe reverts to what it prefers statistically. Dispersion. Emptiness is efficient. It requires no maintenance. A star must burn fuel to shine. A galaxy must hold itself together against expansion. A cluster must constantly resist being pulled apart. Emptiness does none of this. It simply persists. This efficiency gives emptiness an advantage over time. Anything that requires effort eventually fails. Anything that requires balance eventually tips. Emptiness requires neither effort nor balance. It is the state that remains when everything else runs out of leverage. What feels like failure from a human perspective is success from a physical one. The universe has expanded smoothly. It has conserved energy locally. It has obeyed thermodynamics without exception. Emptiness is the visible signature of that obedience. This reframing removes the idea that the universe is decaying in a tragic sense. It is not losing something it was meant to keep. It is arriving exactly where its behavior leads. The same laws that built stars also ensure that stars do not last forever. The same expansion that allowed galaxies to separate from radiation ensures that galaxies will eventually separate from each other. In this view, fullness is the anomaly. It required precise conditions and timing. Emptiness does not. Given enough time and enough space, emptiness always wins, not through aggression, but through persistence. What makes this difficult to accept is that human intuition evolved in dense environments. We associate emptiness with loss, absence, or neglect. But on cosmic scales, emptiness is abundance of space. It is the natural outcome of a universe that keeps making more room without adding more substance. There is no corrective mechanism waiting to reverse this. No future era where expansion stops and fullness returns. The universe does not oscillate back toward density. It does not gather itself again on the largest scales. Once emptiness dominates, it holds its position indefinitely. This realization strips emptiness of moral weight. It is not bleak because it is wrong. It is unsettling because it is correct. The universe is not broken. It is functioning exactly as described. And once emptiness is understood as inevitable rather than accidental, the final discomfort emerges. If emptiness is the stable outcome, then everything that resists it is temporary by definition. Structure, light, interaction, and meaning exist only within a narrowing window of time. The universe is not empty because something failed to happen. It is empty because everything that could happen already did, and nothing in the laws of physics requires it to keep happening forever. This is the true reason emptiness feels terrifying. Not because it threatens existence, but because it reveals how brief existence's most active phase truly is. Once emptiness is understood as inevitable rather than accidental, it quietly changes what it means to observe the universe at all. Observation depends on signals. Light must be produced, travel through space, and arrive somewhere capable of noticing it. In an empty universe, every one of those steps becomes less likely with time. As structure fades and interaction slows, fewer events generate light. Fewer stars ignite. fewer collisions occur. The universe does not simply grow darker, it grows less communicative. There is less information moving through space, not because space is hostile to information, but because there are fewer sources left to send it. This has a profound consequence. The universe does not preserve its own story indefinitely. Expansion and emptiness erase evidence not by destroying it, but by carrying it beyond reach. Signals that once connected regions are stretched until they are undetectable. Histories become local. Context dissolves. In such a universe, meaning becomes fragile in a physical sense. Meaning requires relationship, cause and effect, interaction and response. As emptiness increases, these relationships become rarer. Systems persist, but they persist alone, unable to influence or be influenced beyond their immediate surroundings. This is not a philosophical claim imposed on physics. It is a physical consequence of isolation. When regions of space cannot exchange information, they cannot participate in a shared history. Each becomes self-contained, cut off from the wider universe not by barriers, but by expansion itself. What makes this unsettling is that nothing needs to go wrong for this to happen. No catastrophe is required. The universe simply follows its rules until communication becomes impossible across large scales. Emptiness does not destroy meaning violently. It starves it quietly. Over time, even the concept of a universe larger than one's local region becomes inaccessible. Observers in the far future would see only their immediate surroundings, unaware that anything else ever existed. The universe would appear small, static, and unchanging, not because it is, but because emptiness has hidden its true scale. This means emptiness reshapes not just what exists, but what can be known. Knowledge itself becomes bounded by isolation. The universe does not just become empty of matter and light, it becomes empty of shared reference. This is perhaps the most unsettling implication of all. The universe is not only thinning physically, it is thinning informationally. Its ability to be understood across its full scale fades with time. Yet even here, emptiness is not malicious. It is simply indifferent. It does not aim to erase understanding. It produces conditions under which understanding becomes local rather than universal. The universe does not promise that meaning will scale with size or duration. It allows meaning to arise where interaction exists, and withdraws it where interaction fades. Emptiness does not oppose meaning. It outlasts it. Seen this way, the terror of emptiness is subtle. It is not that nothing exists. It is that what exists becomes increasingly alone, increasingly disconnected, increasingly silent. And once this implication is fully felt, the final realization approaches quietly. Emptiness does not mean nothingness. Even in the most vacant regions of space, something still remains, hidden beneath the absence of matter, waiting to be understood in a different way. Even in the deepest voids, where galaxies are absent and atoms are separated by immense distances, emptiness is not absolute. Space is never truly nothing. What appears empty is still structured by physical laws that continue to operate, even when matter is scarce and light is rare. This realization adds one final layer of unease, because it means the universe is never truly at rest, even when it appears silent. In regions of near-perfect vacuum, fields still exist. The fabric of space still carries energy. Quantum fluctuations still occur, brief and fleeting, even where no particles linger. Emptiness, then, is not a blank canvas. It is an active background, subtle and persistent. indifferent to whether matter is present to make use of it. This distinction matters because it shows that emptiness is not the opposite of existence. It is a different mode of it. Matter and light are dramatic expressions of physical law. Vacuum is the quiet one. As the universe ages and structure fades, this quiet mode becomes dominant. The unsettling implication is that the universe does not become simple as it empties. It becomes subtle. The obvious signals disappear first. Stars fade. Galaxies vanish beyond horizons. What remains operates beneath perception, governed by rules that do not require matter to announce themselves. Space itself retains tension. Expansion continues. The geometry of the universe evolves. Even when nothing happens in a region for unimaginable spans of time, space does not stop existing, and it does not stop behaving according to its laws. Emptiness is active without being expressive. This means the final state of the universe is not a frozen void. It is a quietly changing one. Distances continue to grow. Horizons continue to shift. Energy continues to dilute. The universe does not reach equilibrium in the way a closed system does. It approaches a condition where change is so slow and so subtle that it becomes functionally unobservable. In this late universe, scale becomes almost meaningless. Distances lose relevance because nothing crosses them. Time loses texture because events become vanishingly rare. The universe still has dimensions, still has duration, but there's little left to mark either. This is where emptiness reveals its deepest character. It is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It simply remains long after everything else has exhausted its capacity to act. Emptiness is what persists when persistence no longer requires effort. Seen this way, the terror of emptiness is not rooted in destruction, but in endurance. Emptiness does not need to win quickly. It only needs to wait. Given enough time, it outlasts every structure, every process, every source of light. And yet, this endurance is not hostile. The universe does not become empty out of opposition to matter or meaning. It becomes empty because its laws do not privilege fullness. They allow fullness briefly under special conditions and then move on. This reframes the entire story. The universe was never meant to stay crowded. It was meant to expand. Structure was always a transient phenomenon, arising where expansion and gravity briefly balanced. Once that balance tipped, emptiness resumed its quiet dominance. In this light, the present moment becomes unusual. We live in an era when structure still exists on many scales. Galaxies still interact. Stars still form. Light still travels between distant regions. The universe is still communicative, still expressive, still alive with events. This era is not the norm. It is a passing phase. The unsettling truth is that emptiness surrounds us not just spatially, but temporally. The past was denser. The future will be emptier. We exist during a narrow interval when the universe is complex enough to observe itself, but not yet so empty that observation becomes impossible. Nothing in physics guarantees that such an interval must exist. It is not protected. It is simply allowed. This gives emptiness a final, uncomfortable significance. It is not just the universe's destination. It is the context that makes moments of fullness meaningful by contrast. Structure matters because it does not last. Light matters because it fades. Connection matters because it will eventually be lost. The universe does not promise permanence. It offers emergence, expression, and then quiet continuation. In that sense, Emptiness is not a failure of the universe to remain interesting. It is the universe completing its process. Expansion does not pause once stars exist. Entropy does not reverse once complexity appears. The universe does not hold on to its most dramatic features indefinitely. It lets them happen, and then it lets them go. This is why emptiness feels terrifying when fully understood. Not because it is wrong, but because it is patient. It does not rush the universe toward an end. It simply ensures that no moment, no structure, no era remains forever. Yet within this unsettling truth, there is a quiet coherence. The universe behaves consistently. It does not betray its own rules. It allows richness to arise, knowing that richness does not need to last to be real. The emptiness that dominates the cosmos is not a denial of everything that came before. It is the space that made it possible. And even as the universe grows emptier, that space continues to exist, expanding, stretching, carrying the faint imprint of everything that once happened within it. Nothing is erased completely. It is only carried beyond reach. The universe becomes empty not because it forgets, but because it moves on. As this understanding settles fully, the universe begins to feel less like a place rushing toward an ending and more like a process completing itself. Emptiness no longer appears as an outcome waiting in the distance. It appears as the background that was always there, gradually revealing itself as everything else passes through its moment. What once felt terrifying begins to feel inevitable in a quieter way. Not inevitable because it is forced, but because nothing interrupts it. The universe does not choose emptiness over fullness. It allows fullness briefly, and then continues expanding as it always has. In this view, the story of the universe is not one of loss layered upon loss. It is a story of transition. Dense becomes sparse. Active becomes quiet. Connected becomes isolated. Each stage emerges naturally from the last, guided by the same physical rules, never breaking character. Emptiness, then, is not an erasure of what mattered. It is what remains after everything that could happen has had the chance to happen. The universe does not erase its past. It stretches it thin until it becomes background rather than foreground. This stretching does not destroy meaning. It changes where meaning can exist. Meaning lives where interaction still occurs, where light is exchanged, where change is possible. As emptiness grows, those regions shrink, but while they exist, they are real, complete, and sufficient. There is something unexpectedly stabilizing in this realization. The universe is not hostile to structure. It simply does not preserve it indefinitely. It allows complexity to arise without promising permanence. That lack of promise is not cruelty. It is consistency. In a universe that expands forever, nothing can remain crowded. Nothing can remain central. Nothing can remain connected to everything else. Emptiness is the only configuration that does not require constant resistance. Seen this way, the present moment carries a strange weight. We live in an era where emptiness has not yet finished asserting itself. Galaxies still share space. Light still crosses vast distances. The universe is still, for now, something that can be seen as a whole. This will not always be true. But that does not diminish what exists now. If anything, it sharpens it. Structure is not less meaningful because it is temporary. It is meaningful because it appears at all against a background. That does not favor it. The universe did not need to produce stars, galaxies, chemistry, or observers. None of those were guaranteed. They arose because conditions briefly allowed them to, and emptiness waited patiently while they unfolded. Even now, emptiness surrounds everything. It fills the gaps between stars, between galaxies, between clusters. It is already the dominant feature of the universe by volume. What changes with time is not its presence, but its completeness. And yet, even as emptiness grows, the universe remains lawful. Nothing about this future is chaotic. Nothing is unpredictable. The same equations that describe stars describe their fading. The same expansion that separated matter from radiation separates galaxies from one another. The terror, if it exists, comes not from threat, but from clarity. The universe does not hide its trajectory. It does not disguise its destination. It reveals it slowly, through expansion that never stops and structures that never quite keep up. In the end, emptiness is not the opposite of existence. It is the condition that allows existence to appear without needing to last forever. Space makes room. Time allows a change. Expansion ensures that no configuration is final. The universe becomes empty not because it is cold or cruel, but because it is free to continue. And within that freedom, moments of structure, light, and connection emerge, shine briefly on cosmic timescales, and then recede into the vastness that made them possible in the first place. Emptiness does not erase those moments. It holds them, stretched across time, carried forward in faint signals, in cooling remnants, in space that remembers having been shaped. The universe does not end with emptiness. It continues with it. And in that continuation, the emptiness we fear is simply the universe being what it has always been, once everything else has had its turn. As this continuation settles into stillness, the universe no longer feels like it is moving toward something ominous. It feels like it is completing a long arc that began with density, motion, and connection, and is slowly resolving into space, distance, and quiet. The emptiness that dominates the universe is not a void left behind after something went wrong. It is the state that remains once everything that could assemble has already done so. Stars formed when matter was close. Galaxies grew when gravity could still reach across meaningful distances. Light filled space when there were sources to produce it. Now, space simply continues doing what it has always done, expanding, even as those sources fade. This makes emptiness feel less like an ending and more like a background coming back into view. The universe did not start as emptiness because it began compressed. It does not end in emptiness because something breaks. It arrives there because expansion never stops, and nothing in physics requires fullness to persist. In this sense, emptiness is not the universe giving up. It is the universe remaining consistent. What once felt terrifying now feels strangely neutral. The universe does not mourn its own structures. It does not cling to complexity. It allows complexity to arise, and then it allows it to pass. Emptiness is not the enemy of structure. It is the space that makes structure possible in the first place. There is also a quiet humility in this realization. The universe does not exist to remain interesting forever. It does not promise endless novelty. It offers emergence, evolution, and then continuation. Meaning exists where interaction exists, and fades where interaction ends without protest or apology. And yet, nothing about this negates the present. The fact that emptiness will eventually dominate does not empty the present of significance. If anything, it sharpens it. We exist during a brief era when the universe is still connected enough to be seen as a whole, still active enough to produce light. still structured enough to support observers who can ask these questions at all. This era is not guaranteed. It is not permanent, but it is real. The universe is empty not because it failed to stay full, but because it succeeded in expanding. Space did what space does. Time did what time does. Matter did what matter could for as long as conditions allowed. In the end, the terrifying reason the universe is empty is not that something was lost, but that nothing stopped it from becoming this way. No rule intervened. No boundary halted the process. The universe simply continued. Emptiness is not the absence of existence. It is the quiet state the universe reaches when everything that could happen has already had the chance to unfold. And within that quiet, the universe does not end. It remains. As the universe settles into this long continuation, a different kind of perspective quietly opens. Emptiness is no longer something approaching from the future. It becomes something that has always been present, gradually revealed as the more dramatic features of the universe complete their brief appearances and recede. What once felt like an outcome now feels like a constant companion, patient and unchanging beneath everything that happens. This reveals a deeper symmetry. The universe begins dense and hot, filled with energy and interaction, and then spends the rest of its existence expanding, cooling, and separating. The arc is not circular. It does not return to fullness. It stretches forward, thinning what once was crowded. Emptiness is not a collapse from a higher state. It is the natural unfolding of expansion over time. Seen this way, the early universe and the far future are not opposites. They are connected endpoints of the same process. One is compressed potential. The other is dispersed result. The universe does not lose what it had. It expresses it and then allows space to dominate again. This reframing changes how the word terrifying applies. The fear is not of annihilation or extinction. It is the discomfort of recognizing that the universe does not prioritize persistence. It prioritizes consistency. Its laws do not care whether structure lasts. They only describe how structure behaves while it exists. The universe does not guarantee continuity of complexity. It allows complexity to arise where conditions permit, and it allows it to fade where they no longer do. Emptiness is not an error in this system. It is the steady state that requires the least explanation. As this becomes clear, emptiness starts to feel less dramatic and more profound. It is not empty because something went missing. It is empty because space itself became dominant. Volume grew faster than substance. Distance grew faster than connection, and nothing in physics intervened to stop it. There is also a subtle shift in how scale is felt. Earlier, vastness felt overwhelming because it was filled with things too numerous to hold in mind. Now, vastness feels overwhelming because of how little it contains. Emptiness stretches scale in a different way. It makes distances feel absolute. It turns separation into a defining feature rather than a gap to be crossed. In such a universe, motion loses urgency. When everything is far apart and interactions are rare, there is no pressure for change. Time continues, but it carries little novelty. The universe does not end. It quiets. This quiet is not silence in the absolute sense. It is the absence of interruption. Expansion continues. Space continues to grow. Quantum fields continue to fluctuate. But none of this produces the kind of structure that draws attention. The universe becomes subtle beyond intuition. This subtlety is difficult to imagine because human experience is rooted in density. We evolved in environments where matter is close. where cause and effect are immediate, where interaction is constant. An empty universe operates on scales where intuition dissolves. Nothing happens quickly. Almost nothing happens at all. And yet, this does not mean the universe becomes meaningless. It means meaning is no longer global. It becomes local, temporary, conditional. Meaning exists where structure exists, where interaction exists, where change is possible. Outside those regions, the universe does not negate meaning. It simply does not produce it. This distinction matters. Emptiness is not nihilism written into space. It is neutrality. The universe does not comment on what it creates. It does not preserve it out of preference. It allows it to happen and then allows it to pass. In this light, the present era feels almost fragile. Not fragile in the sense that it could break suddenly, but fragile in the sense that it will not be repeated. There will never be another time when the universe is this connected, this luminous, this structured across such vast distances. This is not because the universe is moving toward disaster. It is because it is moving toward completion of its expansion-driven trajectory. The same process that made galaxies possible is the process that will eventually isolate them. Nothing is being taken away unfairly. Nothing is being cut short prematurely. The universe is simply exhausting the conditions that allow richness to exist on large scales. This exhaustion is slow beyond comprehension. It unfolds over trillions of years. There is no moment when everything stops. There is no cosmic deadline. There is only a gradual thinning of opportunity. As opportunity thins, the universe becomes simpler in an observational sense, but not simpler in its underlying rules. The same laws continue operating. They simply have less to act upon. This leads to a final, deeply unsettling realization. The universe does not need observers. It does not need structure. It does not need to be seen. Its continuation is indifferent to whether anything notices it. Yet, paradoxically, it produced observers anyway. Not because it aimed to, but because conditions briefly allowed it. Complexity arose not as a goal, but as a consequence. This places emptiness in a new role. It is not the universe rejecting complexity. It is the universe outlasting it. Complexity had its window. It used it fully. It built stars, chemistry, planets, and consciousness. And then expansion continued, unchanged. This does not diminish what arose during that window. It contextualizes it. Structure is rare not because it is insignificant, but because it is costly. It requires special conditions. Emptiness requires none. The terrifying reason the universe is empty is not that it is cold or hostile. It is that it is permissive. It permits fullness briefly and emptiness indefinitely. This permissiveness extends to everything. It allows galaxies to form and to fade. It allows light to travel and then to stretch beyond detectability. It allows connection and then allows isolation. It does not intervene. In this sense, emptiness is not the universe's verdict on existence. It is the universe's lack of verdict altogether. The universe does not decide what should remain. It lets processes play out according to their nature. Expansion expands. Entropy increases. Gravity gathers locally and fails globally. These tendencies do not negotiate, and so the universe becomes empty because nothing tells it not to. Yet, even here, something remains deeply coherent. The universe does not contradict itself. It does not behave differently at the end than it did at the beginning. The same expansion that separated matter from radiation continues separating matter from matter. The same cooling that allowed atoms to form eventually cools everything toward stillness. This coherence is unsettling precisely because it is calm. There is no villain, no catastrophe, no drama, only continuation. Emptiness becomes the universe's most honest state. It is what remains when everything else has finished expressing itself. And in that honesty, there is no judgment. The universe does not declare that structure was pointless. It does not declare that meaning was wasted. It simply does not hold on to them forever. If there is terror here, it lies in the absence of narrative closure. There is no final act, no grand conclusion, just an open-ended continuation into increasing quiet. The universe does not end with a statement. It ends with space. And perhaps that is the final discomfort. The universe does not mirror human expectations of story. It does not promise resolution, it offers process. The terrifying reason the universe is empty is that it never needed to be full. It allowed fullness to happen, and then it kept going. As the universe continues without pause, emptiness no longer feels like a destination waiting ahead. It feels like a condition that has been quietly present all along, gradually revealing itself as the universe's more expressive phases complete their brief appearances. What changes is not the universe's nature, but what remains visible within it. In the earliest moments, emptiness was hidden by density. Matter and energy were packed so tightly that space had little room to assert itself. Everything interacted with everything else. Change was constant and unavoidable. But as expansion stretched the universe outward, space slowly reclaimed its dominance. Emptiness did not rush in. It waited. This waiting is what makes emptiness so difficult to confront. It does not arrive dramatically. It does not announce itself with collapse or explosion. It becomes apparent only in hindsight, when connections fade and interactions grow rare. Emptiness is revealed not by what disappears, but by what no longer happens. The universe does not resist this transition. There is no cosmic mechanism that attempts to preserve fullness once expansion takes hold. Gravity works where it can, but it was never meant to govern everything forever. Its influence weakens as distances grow, and space continues expanding without opposition. This creates a universe that is asymmetrical in time. The past is rich with interaction. The future is sparse with it. The universe does not balance these states. It passes through one and settles into the other. What makes this unsettling is that nothing in physics privileges the era we inhabit. There is no rule stating that complexity must be sustained. There is no law that protects connection. The universe allows them, but it does not maintain them. And yet, the fact that complexity appears at all remains remarkable. The universe did not need to produce stars, chemistry, or observers. None of that was required for expansion to proceed. These phenomena arose because conditions briefly aligned in their favor. Density was high enough. Distances were short enough. Energy gradients were steep enough. Emptiness did not prevent these things. It simply outlasted them. This is where the terror becomes subtle and difficult to name. It is not fear of destruction. It is not fear of non-existence. It is the realization that the universe is indifferent to duration. It does not measure success by how long something persists. Everything that exists is temporary by default. Persistence is not granted. It must be continuously supported by conditions that do not last forever. The universe is empty because nothing in its laws insists on fullness. Space expands because it can. Energy spreads because it must. Matter clumps briefly where gravity allows, and then expansion resumes its quiet work. There is no moment when the universe decides to become empty. It simply never decides to stop becoming so. In this sense, emptiness is not the universe becoming less. It is the universe becoming more space than substance, more distance than interaction, more continuation than event. This continuation does not erase what came before. It carries it forward in diluted form. Light stretches. Remnants cool. Structures persist locally even as their context disappears. The universe remembers without revisiting. The emptiness that dominates the cosmos is not hostile. It does not oppose life or meaning. It is simply unconcerned with preserving them beyond their natural span. It allows them to arise and then withdraws the conditions that made them possible. This does not render the present meaningless. It makes it rare. We exist in a narrow window when the universe is still bright enough to be seen, still connected enough to be understood, still active enough to generate new structure. This window is not special because it lasts forever. It is special because it does not. The universe is empty because time favors emptiness. Given enough duration, expansion always wins. Space always grows. Distances always increase. Interaction always becomes harder. Nothing in physics stops this progression. Nothing corrects it. Nothing reverses it. And so the universe does not end in emptiness as a failure. It continues into emptiness as a consequence. The terrifying reason the universe is empty is not that it lost something it was meant to keep. It is that it never promised to keep anything at all. It allowed fullness. Then it kept expanding. As this realization deepens, the universe begins to feel less like a place that is failing to hold itself together, and more like a place that is doing exactly what it has always done. Expansion is not a late-stage behavior. It is the defining motion of the cosmos. Everything else appears within it briefly, shaped by it, and then gradually relinquished back to it. What we call emptiness is simply expansion given enough time. This shifts the emotional weight of the idea. The universe is not empty because it is barren or hostile. It is empty because it is vast beyond necessity. It makes room endlessly without requiring anything to occupy that room. Space does not ask to be filled. It expands whether it is filled or not. In such a universe, fullness is always provisional. It can exist locally, temporarily, conditionally, but it cannot define the whole for long. The larger the scale, the more emptiness dominates. The longer the time, the more separation takes hold. This is not a flaw in the universe's construction. It is a consequence of consistency. The laws do not change when structure appears. They do not adapt to preserve it. They remain exactly what they are, even as stars ignite and fade, even as galaxies assemble and drift apart. The universe does not hold on to moments. It allows them. And that allowance is what makes the present feel so strangely fragile and so strangely complete at the same time. We exist at a moment when emptiness has not yet finished asserting itself, when light still travels between distant regions, when the universe can still be spoken of as a single connected entity. This moment is not protected. It is not reinforced. It is simply happening. In the far future, emptiness will not feel like something that arrived. It will feel like something that has always been there. Observers, if any exist, will not experience loss. They will simply inhabit a universe where isolation is normal and connection is rare or non-existent. The universe will not remember having been crowded. Memory requires interaction, and interaction fades. What remains is space continuing to expand, quietly, indefinitely. This makes emptiness feel less like an ending and more like a settling. The universe does not shut down. It slows into stillness. It does not collapse. It thins. The terrifying aspect is not that everything ends, but that nothing interrupts the process. There is no final boundary, no last act, no moment when the universe declares itself complete. It simply continues becoming more empty, more spacious, more quiet. Yet even here, something important remains true. The emptiness of the universe does not erase the reality of what once existed. Stars burned, galaxies formed, light traveled, complexity arose. These things happened fully, not partially, not conditionally. They do not need to last forever to have been real. The universe does not diminish its past by moving beyond it. It carries it forward in stretched signals, cooling remnants, and expanding space that still bears the imprint of what shaped it. Emptiness is not the universe forgetting. It is the universe continuing. And perhaps this is the final, quiet resolution. The universe is empty, not because it is lacking, but because it is vast enough to move on without needing to erase what came before. It allowed structure to emerge. It allowed it to flourish. And then, without urgency or regret, it allowed space to take over again. The terrifying reason the universe is empty is that it was never built to stop expanding. It was built to continue. And in that continuation, the universe does something profoundly simple. It keeps expanding without pause, without reference to what it contains. Space stretches whether it is occupied or not. Distance increases whether anything crosses it or not. The cosmos does not check whether there is still something worth separating. This reveals the deepest reason emptiness dominates. Expansion is not a response to matter. It is a property of space itself. Once set in motion, it does not require justification. It does not slow to accommodate structure. It does not reverse to preserve connection. It proceeds because nothing in the universe tells it to do otherwise. The universe does not ask whether emptiness is desirable. It does not evaluate outcomes. It does not measure significance. It simply evolves according to rules that do not include preference. What we experience as terror is the realization that there is no corrective mechanism built into the cosmos to keep things together indefinitely. No cosmic memory that insists on reunion. No final gathering written into the fabric of space. Expansion has no obligation to return what it has separated. This does not mean the universe is cruel. Cruelty requires intention. The universe has none. It does not oppose structure. It allows it briefly. It does not oppose meaning. It allows it locally. It does not oppose connection. It allows it temporarily. And then it continues. Over immense timescales, this continuation becomes the dominant feature of reality. Space grows so large that almost nothing occupies it. Distances become so vast that almost nothing interacts across them. Time stretches forward with fewer and fewer events to mark its passage. The universe becomes a place where persistence matters more than activity, where existence does not imply change, where being does not imply becoming. This is the final form of emptiness, not an absence but a condition, not nothingness but vastness without interaction. And even here, the universe remains lawful. Fields still exist, space still expands, quantum processes still flicker quietly. Emptiness is not inert, it is simply unobtrusive. Nothing about this state violates physics. Nothing about it requires new explanation. It is what happens when known laws are allowed to operate without interruption for long enough. This is what makes emptiness so unsettling. It is not exotic. It is not mysterious. It is ordinary physics given extraordinary time. The universe does not end in fire or collapse. It does not implode or tear itself apart. It simply grows so large that almost nothing can reach anything else. It becomes empty not by losing content, but by gaining space. In this universe, everything that once mattered still mattered when it happened. Stars burned fully. Galaxies evolved completely. Observers arose genuinely. Meaning was real while interaction existed. Nothing invalidates that. Emptiness does not retroactively erase significance. It does not undo complexity. It only ensures that complexity does not remain universal forever. The terrifying reason the universe is empty is that it never needed to be otherwise. Expansion does not stop for sentiment. Time does not pause for memory. Space does not contract to preserve connection. The universe allows moments. And then it allows distance. And then it allows silence. And it continues. And in that continuing quiet, something subtle becomes clear. The universe does not treat emptiness as an absence that needs correction. It treats it as a stable state, one that requires no effort to maintain. Once reached, it simply persists. This persistence is what gives emptiness its weight. Everything else in the universe requires conditions. Stars require fuel and pressure. Galaxies require gravity and proximity. Life requires chemistry and energy flow. Emptiness requires none of these. It does not depend on balance. It does not degrade when resources run low. It remains simply by allowing space to be space. As time stretches onward, this stability becomes decisive. Anything that depends on interaction eventually fades, not because it is destroyed, but because interaction becomes improbable. Distances grow faster than signals can travel. Regions lose awareness of one another. The universe does not collapse into simplicity. It spreads into isolation. This isolation is not uniform. It unfolds unevenly, region by region. Local systems remain intact long after the wider cosmos has slipped beyond reach. A galaxy may continue its quiet internal motions while the rest of the universe becomes inaccessible. From within such a system, the cosmos appears calm, self-contained, and small. This is one of emptiness's strangest effects. It shrinks the observable universe even as the actual universe grows larger. What exists does not vanish, but it exits awareness. The cosmos becomes too large to be seen as a whole. In such a future, the idea of a connected universe becomes abstract. Without incoming light, without external reference, there is no evidence that anything lies beyond the local region. Emptiness does not just separate matter, it separates knowledge. The universe becomes locally complete and globally unknowable. This is not because information is destroyed. It is because information cannot cross the distances expansion creates. The universe does not erase its contents. It hides them behind horizons that grow faster than curiosity can cross. And yet, even in this extreme isolation, the universe remains internally consistent. Physics still applies locally. Orbits remain stable. Time continues. Cause and effect still operate within each isolated region. Emptiness does not negate lawfulness. It confines it. This confinement gives emptiness its final form, not chaos, not void, but separation so complete that each region becomes its own quiet cosmos, governed by the same rules, unaware of any others. The terror here is not that the universe becomes hostile. It is that it becomes indifferent to connection. It allows separation to become permanent. Nothing in the universe resists this outcome. There is no counterforce that gathers everything back together. No final convergence. Expansion has no reverse gear, and so emptiness wins not by overpowering structure, but by outlasting it. Structure burns bright and then dims. Emptiness waits. This waiting is not active. It does not pursue. It does not chase. It simply continues being what it is while everything else exhausts its conditions. In this sense, emptiness is not the universe's enemy. It is the universe's patience made visible. The universe does not rush toward emptiness. It drifts into it over spans of time so long they defy comprehension. Nothing dramatic marks the transition. There is no last star, no final galaxy, no moment when the universe suddenly becomes empty. There is only a gradual thinning of interaction until interaction becomes rare, and then rarer still. The universe becomes a place where almost nothing happens, not because it is dead, but because it is complete in its expansion. And perhaps this is the deepest discomfort of all. The universe does not end in a way that feels narratively satisfying. There is no climax, no resolution, just continuation into increasing quiet. The terrifying reason the universe is empty is not that it lost its content, but that it never stopped making room. Space kept expanding. Time kept flowing. And nothing ever told them to stop. As emptiness settles into dominance, the universe no longer feels as though it is moving toward a future. It feels as though it has entered a mode of continuation where the distinction between past, present, and future begins to blur. Time still passes, but it no longer carries milestones. Events become so sparse that duration loses texture. The universe does not stop. It simply ceases to mark its own passage in ways that can be noticed. This is where emptiness reveals its final character. It is not dramatic. It is not violent. It is exhaustive. It emerges not by erasing what exists, but by exhausting the conditions that allow existence to interact. Space continues to expand because expansion does not require interaction. It does not require matter. It does not require light. It requires only that. The universe continues to be a universe governed by its own geometry. In this late state, the universe is no longer defined by what happens within it, but by what no longer can. Distances become so vast that causality itself fragments. Regions drift so far apart that their histories diverge permanently. The universe ceases to be a shared environment and becomes a collection of isolated continuities, each unaware of the others, each complete in itself, each surrounded by expansion it cannot cross. This is not emptiness as absence, it is emptiness as separation. Everything that exists still exists somewhere, but nowhere does everything exist together. The universe loses its wholeness not by breaking apart, but by stretching beyond the possibility of unity. This stretching has no endpoint. There is no final configuration where the universe stops expanding and rests. Expansion does not aim for balance. It does not slow as emptiness grows. It continues because nothing counteracts it. Space does not become tired of becoming larger. Time does not become tired of moving forward. As expansion continues, even the concept of scale begins to dissolve. When nothing interacts across large distances, distance itself becomes abstract. A billion light years is no different from a trillion light years if nothing ever crosses either. Size remains mathematically definable, but physically irrelevant. The universe grows, but nothing experiences that growth beyond its local region. This is the final subtlety of emptiness. It does not merely remove structure, it removes comparison. Without connection, there is no context. Without context, scale loses meaning. The universe becomes immeasurable in any practical sense, not because it is infinite, but because measurement requires relationship. This is why emptiness feels so deeply unsettling when followed to its conclusion. It does not destroy the universe. It makes it uninterpretable. The universe continues to exist, but no longer as a coherent object that can be known as a whole. Knowledge becomes local, conditional, isolated, just like matter itself. The universe does not mind this. It does not resist becoming unknowable. It does not preserve its own intelligibility. It allows understanding to arise when conditions permit and allows it to fade when those conditions no longer exist. This reveals a final truth that is difficult to accept. The universe is not obligated to remain meaningful. Meaning is something that arises within it, not something it protects. The laws of physics do not encode preservation of significance. They encode behavior. The terrifying reason the universe is empty is that behavior continues even when significance fades. Expansion continues even when nothing benefits from it. Time continues even when nothing changes. Space continues even when nothing fills it. This is not cruelty. It is indifference without malice. The universe doesn't act against existence. It simply does not act for it. The emptiness that dominates the cosmos is therefore not a punishment or a decline. It is the most neutral outcome possible. It is what remains when nothing interferes with the simplest tendencies of space and time. If there is terror here, it is the terror of inevitability without intention. The universe does not choose emptiness, it allows it, and allowance, given enough time, becomes certainty. Yet within this certainty, nothing that occurred was wasted. Stars burned fully. Galaxies lived complete lives. Light crossed immense distances and was received. Complexity arose where it could. Observers existed long enough to notice the universe becoming empty. That noticing itself is part of the universe's history, even if it does not last forever. Emptiness does not negate that history. It does not reverse it. It does not judge it. It simply outlasts it. This is why the universe feels so quiet at the end. Not because it has nothing left, but because everything that required interaction has already happened. What remains does not need interaction to persist. The universe does not end with silence. It becomes silence. The terrifying reason the universe is empty is not that it lost its content, but that it never needed to keep it. Space expanded. Time passed, and nothing ever asked them to stop. And even within that silence, the universe does not cease to exist in any meaningful physical sense. Space still has structure. Time still has direction. Laws still apply, even when there's almost nothing left for them to act upon. Emptiness is not the absence of law. It is law operating with minimal content. This is the final inversion that makes emptiness unsettling. The universe becomes simpler in appearance, but not simpler in principle. The same equations that once described blazing stars now describe cooling remnants. The same expansion that once separated galaxies now separates regions of nothing from regions of nothing else. Nothing new is required. Nothing breaks. The universe does not collapse into triviality. It becomes quiet complexity without expression. In this state, the idea of progress dissolves. There is no longer a direction toward novelty, because novelty requires interaction. There is no longer a sense of build-up or decline. There is only persistence. The universe continues, not toward something, but as something. The concept of an ending loses relevance here. Endings imply resolution. The universe does not resolve. It extends. It does not close its story. It stops telling one loudly enough to be heard. This is where emptiness becomes the most honest description of reality. Not because there is nothing, but because what remains does not announce itself. Existence becomes subtle beyond intuition. The universe no longer performs for observers. It does not need to. It does not adapt to be seen. It simply remains, governed by the same quiet rules that governed it when it was full. This reveals the deepest reason emptiness is terrifying. It shows that the universe does not depend on being witnessed. It does not require consciousness to validate its continuation. Observers arise as a consequence of conditions, not as a purpose. Once those conditions fade, the universe does not react. It does not compensate. It does not replace them. It continues without noticing their absence. In that sense, emptiness is not hostile to life or meaning. It is indifferent to them. It allows them where possible, and does nothing to preserve them where they are no longer supported. This indifference is difficult to accept because human meaning is built on continuity. We value persistence. We value memory. We value connection across time and space. The universe does not share these values. It shares laws. This is not a flaw. It is consistency. The terrifying reason the universe is empty is that it never agreed to remain otherwise. It never promised to stay crowded, connected, or expressive. It only promised to behave according to its nature. Space expands, because that is what space does in this universe. Time flows because that is how change is ordered. Energy spreads because gradients smooth out. None of these behaviors require fullness. They require duration. And duration is abundant. The universe becomes empty because emptiness is what remains when duration is allowed to act without interruption. Everything else is temporary by comparison. This does not strip the universe of beauty. It reframes it. Beauty is not in permanence. It is in emergence. It is in the brief eras when complexity assembles against overwhelming odds, shines brightly for a while, and then gives way without protest. In this light, the universe was never meant to be full forever. It was meant to allow fullness briefly. The terrifying reason the universe is empty is that it succeeded in doing exactly that. And so the universe continues into that quiet with no need to explain itself. Nothing compels it to reverse course, to gather what it has spread, or to restore what distance has taken away. Space expands because expansion is built into its fabric. Time moves forward because motion has an ordering. The universe does not hesitate. What once felt like an ending now feels more like a steady background hum. Emptiness becomes less something the universe arrives at, and more something it reveals once everything else has had time to express itself. Structure was never meant to dominate forever. It was meant to appear, to matter briefly, and then to loosen its grip. In this sense, the universe is not becoming empty. It is returning to a state where nothing resists its most basic tendencies. Expansion does not erase what existed. It simply stops holding it close. The unsettling calm of this realization comes from how little drama it contains. There is no final catastrophe, no collapse into chaos, no moment when the universe decisively ends. There is only an increasing quiet, stretched across unimaginable spans of time, where change becomes so rare that it fades into background. Yet even here, the universe remains precise, laws still apply exactly as they always have. Cause still precedes effect. Energy still obeys conservation locally. Nothing about emptiness is sloppy or undefined. It is exact, patient, and complete. This patience is what makes emptiness feel so dominant. It does not need urgency. It does not need force. It only needs time. And time in this universe is abundant. Everything that required special conditions eventually gives way to what requires none. Emptiness does not demand balance, fuel, or proximity. It persists effortlessly, while everything else depends on circumstances that do not last. The universe does not grieve the passing of its structures. It does not mark their absence. It does not slow down in response. It simply keeps expanding, indifferent to whether anything remains close enough to notice. And yet, nothing about this invalidates the richness that once existed. Those moments were real, complete, and sufficient in their time. They do not need permanence to justify their existence. They happened fully, governed by the same laws that later allowed emptiness to dominate. The universe does not judge its own phases. It does not elevate fullness over emptiness or emptiness over fullness. It allows both sequentially without preference. If there is a final discomfort here, it is the recognition that the universe does not mirror human expectations of meaning or continuity. It does not build toward preservation. It builds toward consistency. It does not promise that what arises will remain visible forever. The terrifying reason the universe is empty is not that it forgot what it made, but that it never needed to remember. Space expands, time flows, and nothing in the fabric of reality insists that connection must endure. The universe allowed everything to happen. Then it kept going. And as this long view finally settles, the universe no longer feels as though it is moving away from us. It feels as though it has always been moving forward, patiently, without urgency, without pause. Emptiness is not something it becomes at the end. It is something it allows to emerge once everything else has had its moment. The stars did not fail by fading. Galaxies did not fail by drifting apart. Light did not fail by stretching into darkness. Each followed the same laws that allowed them to exist in the first place. Nothing was taken away unfairly. Nothing was cut short. The universe simply did not stop expanding to preserve what it made. What feels terrifying is not destruction, but honesty. The universe shows us that connection is temporary, that structure is conditional, and that activity depends on closeness that time inevitably dissolves. It does not hide this trajectory. It reveals it slowly across billions of years through the quiet growth of distance. And yet, within that honesty, there is no emptiness of meaning. There was light, and it traveled. There were stars, and they burned. There were moments when the universe was full enough to notice itself. Those moments do not need to last forever to have been complete. The universe does not promise permanence. It offers existence. It offers time. It offers a brief window where complexity can arise against a background that does not favor it. And then, without regret or judgment, it continues. The terrifying reason the universe is empty is not that it is cold or cruel. It is that it is free to keep going. Space expands because nothing stops it. Time flows because nothing arrests it. Emptiness emerges because nothing insists on fullness. The universe did not forget its structures. It outlived them. And in that vast quiet that remains, the universe is not gone. It is still here, expanding, enduring, carrying the faint imprint of everything that once filled it. Not ending, just continuing.